You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to Filmmaking Conversations with Damian Swaby.
Today on Filmmaking Conversations, I'll be speaking to Emily Procter. She is a native of North Carolina who moved to Los Angeles and then landed several small roles in films such as Jerry Maguire. She then got the chance to audition for The West Wing and got the part. Emily dedicated herself to infusing her character in the show with spice, grit and southern charm for 10 seasons. During her acting career, she has helped make CSI Miami a global staple for CBS. Emily founded The Ground, a non-profit in 2019. The Ground offers social and emotional language awareness to combat negative personal narratives and support peaceful conflict resolution. The Ground currently offers programming at Kern Valley State Prison, Nightingale School in Stockton. The Ground supports equity of opportunity for all people. Emily loves to support people and the community, and it was a pleasure having her as a guest on Filmmaking Conversations. Emily, how are you today?
I am great. I'm so glad that I'm finally connecting with you.
Good. I'm so glad that we're connecting for sure. It's been a while and I've been looking forward to it. And I know the listeners would appreciate this conversation we're going to have because of the range of work you've done and what you're doing, which is quite different from what a lot of people would expect from you, I imagine, just from watching you on television. So I've spoken earlier about your shows and the amount of work you've done, quality programming and brilliant performances from you. So what inspired you to become an actress?
Oh my gosh. I had gone to college to be an interpreter. I wanted to be a Spanish interpreter. And I had a difficult time with the department there. And just by super strange circumstances, while I was in college, I ended up doing the weather for the local CBS affiliate. And I started that process of what is it going to look like if I become a journalist? I was starting to report. I was going to other towns to interview at different stations. And I was so young, I had to take my mom with me. So these were very strange interviews.
Wow.
And at some point it was 2:00 in the morning and I was reading The Wire and I was compiling stuff. And I looked up and saw, coincidentally, a CBS sitcom and thought, maybe I should just try that. It's kind of what I'm doing, but it seems a lot easier. And maybe I can make it happen if I just try really hard. And that's actually how I got into acting. It wasn't your typical, love of theater or music or anything like that. I do think it was really driven, as my work is now, by narratives and storytelling. I do really enjoy storytelling, and it just so happened that the outlet for me became acting, and I got very lucky.
And being a weather lady, how was that? Lots of fun or long hours? How does it work? I've got no idea.
Oh my gosh, every moment was a mystery. I mean, I was so underqualified for that job. I was 19 years old. I have no idea how I was even hired for that position, but I had a great time. I learned so much. And I will not lie. I think my forecasts, if they were good at all, were only good because I watched the Weather Channel and I would call my mom 3 hours away and ask her what it was like there. And I'd say, we can be expecting this, because I knew it was going to travel. But I did. I mean, I learned a lot. It was hilarious, awesome, hard. And I'm so glad I was able to do it. It was fun.
So how do you make that transition from weather girl to actress? What's the process like and how long did it take?
I think the thing about any job in the arts is, and I think it's probably what we all love about it, is it takes the time it takes. It takes some people 10 years. It takes some people 40 years. That transition for me, I don't know if this was in any way realistic, but I had read some article and it said there are this many actors and actresses in Hollywood, and there are this many jobs, and it was meant to deter people. But what I really just did is I used it to create an algorithm of, if I went on 80 auditions, then my 81st audition would be mine. And as I became, more used to the system, my ratio would get better. So I would go on auditions
I
for
love it.
anything. I would just be like, they're like, we're looking for a 14-year-old boy. I'm like, I am your person. They're like, we're looking for someone who can really cook. I'm like, I am it. And people would just stare at me and think, you're never getting this job. But it allowed me to focus on something other than defeat. But it was really just some sort of horoscope that I created for myself that worked. And so, like any art form, I think you do it by doing it, and it takes time. And
Yeah.
Everyone will always tell you why it's a bad idea, but it's really none of their business.
Amen. That's
Amen.
you're completely right there. And when you go to these auditions, what type of process do you have? Because everybody has a different process, and some people can be quite intimidated by what goes on in the room, in terms of you walk into a room for an audition, you meet 3 or 4 people behind a table that are writing notes as you're acting, or that might look disappointed, they might look happy, they might look somewhat sad, or whatever. What is your process like when you have an audition, and how do you feel when you walk into the room?
I am I am way more comfortable working than I am auditioning. For me, it's always been difficult because I'm an extroverted extrovert. And so for me to walk into a room full of people, the first thing I want to do is just sort of chat everybody up and see what's happening, and connect with people, because that's sort of my base note as a human. Um, and then I have to switch into being a character. So I always really struggled with that. I do think for me, my security blanket was always in memorizing everything. So I memorize my lines
Ah,
and the other person's lines. So that way I can really listen. And I find, just like in life itself, when you are really listening to another human being, they're engaged by it. And I always
yeah.
say pregnancy and motherhood are very different ideas. Auditioning and acting are very different ideas. So I think the more engaging a person can be and the more connected a person can be, great. Get the job, then do the work to make a character. But you don't have to do the hard work of what the job looks like for the audition. You just need to do the audition and get the job so that you can do the job, if that makes sense.
That makes complete sense. And that's an absolutely great way to look at it. I really appreciate that. You've left us with food for thought by saying that, for sure. But have you
Oh, thank
had
you.
anyone close to you that has kind of said, why are you doing acting? Why don't you go into journalism or law or something along those lines? And how did you cope with that and overcome such negativity in your world?
Well, for me personally, I find being doubted a very strong motivator. For me, something that works is like, oh, yeah, that's what you think. Well, watch this. So those kind of thoughts from people were very helpful. Um, and I used it. I almost did a reverse engineering of, like, what will happen if I don't make this work for myself. And if I found that, what would happen if I didn't make it work so horrible, then I would keep going. And if I was like, if that doesn't work, I
Wow.
won't be sad in 20 years. I'll be like, oh, that didn't work. So that's kind of how I motivated myself. And everyone thought I was nuts. I mean, everyone thought I was absolutely bonkers. They're like, why are you doing this? It seems painful and horrible. But there again, I think all humans are artists, and some of us just choose to walk the journey of living as an artist. But um, that is part of the process. It is painful, because one thing I always say to my daughter is, I say, life looks like the colors you use to draw. And I always talk about, in my programs now, my children's programs, my adult programs, whenever I'm with people, I always say, and I believe, that we come into life with a full box of emotional crayons, and our life looks like what we color with. So it's
Wow.
okay to use the sad crayon. It's okay to use the disappointed crayon. They're real and they make our life more colorful. That's not saying that it should always only be that, but those are powerful crayons. You know, when you tend to go to tropical places where it's really beautiful and easy and people come to relax and be at peace, it's not often the birthplace of great art. It's, you know, palm trees and waves and suns, because you're like, this is all I got. This is what I'm
Yeah.
doing here. And the birth of truly great art, I believe, comes from a fair amount of suffering and a longing for change, and for deep change, or for deep exploration, or for a deep view of what is happening in the world or within a person or within the mind.
So would you say where you come from in North Carolina, is there a lot of art in that area? Is there a lot of theater and music and film?
Is there a lot of art there? You know, I think there's lovely examples of art, and there are, you know, civic centers and dance troupes and painters and writers. But for me,
Oh,
I think particularly there's something in the land of North Carolina that I find very creative. I mean, it's where John Coltrane is from, it's where Nina Simone is from. There are some really great artists who come out of North Carolina, and
mm,
I think it has to do with the setting and the nature and circumstances. So there is art to go and watch there, but I do think there are many pockets of birthplaces of real creativity.
excellent. So after you've left being a weather girl and you started to have aspirations of being an actress and everything, did you get formally trained at all, or did you go for it?
Well, I did some formal training, but I think it was more for other people's comfort than my own. I mean, I always
Yeah.
worked better when I just trusted my gut and tried to do my job. Um, I
Mm.
think, you know, I would have been better served if I had had some sort of great training to fall back on, but that's not how it worked out for me, and it was fine.
And it certainly worked out well. So I take my hat off to you. Well done. I really admire your go-to attitude. You know, it's there, you like it, you want it, you're going to do it. And I really love people when they're able to do things like that. And any
Well, it sounds like you're
auditions
like that.
when you first, I'd like to think so, that's for sure. I wouldn't like to be any other way. I'm pretty upfront about that.
Yeah.
And like when you had your first audition that got you a role, how did you feel, and who was the first person, who were the first people you told?
Oh, I would always call my parents and my grandparents. I mean, I should be very honest about the fact that before I got a job, I had a series of tragic auditions. Like, if they had been
Oh,
filmed
okay.
and uploaded to YouTube, they would be hilarious. You know, I remember people saying, like, where are you looking? Because I would just get in there and start talking and like moving my hands. They're like, look at me. And I'm like, oh, okay. You know, and you always learn those things about how people want you to do it through this very abrupt nature. You know, I remember one of the first jobs I had, I was sitting in the makeup chair, and the makeup artist looked at me. She goes, oh my God. And she called the other makeup artist and over, and I was like, what's happening? And the other makeup artist goes, can you believe this? And she's like, no. What are you going to do? And she's like, I'm going to fix it. And I was like, oh my God, what is wrong with me? And the makeup artist was like, your eyebrows are hideous. And I was like, they are?
Oh gosh.
But it was a time when everyone was like doing like super thin eyebrows, and I just had regular eyebrows. So like they gave
Oh,
me
okay.
these like tiny pencil thin eyebrows. And when I saw my mom, she's like, what happened to your eyebrows? It's like, I don't know. Apparently they were hideous. So, you know, that's why I do think that sort of algorithm of like every 81st audition was mine was so helpful, because people oftentimes are in their head so much about what they're trying to accomplish. I think
Hmm.
everyone in the arts has something deep to prove, even if it seems like they're sitting in the power position. Studios don't want to fail. Heads of studios don't want to be let go.
Yeah.
Producers don't want to be wrong. Directors want to prove that they can tell the story. I think the safest, most confident position is probably a writer, because they're like, I spent years with this material and I think it works. Everyone
Yeah.
else is just kind of like trying not to sink, I think.
That's a good point. That's a very, very good point. And to a certain degree, once the script's written and it's finalized and it's shoot development and pre-production's on its way and everything, the writers kind of, it's a part of it, but they're not like fundamentally involved anymore. So it's a very
Well, it's not
different
so painful. They're not so
role.
painfully involved. They spent
Yeah.
years being painful about it.
Yeah.
They've let it go.
Yeah, they've been painful in their office at home or whatever.
Exactly.
But it's different. I completely see what you mean in that way. But moving to Hollywood and moving to the bright lights, what was that like?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's like one of those things. Have you ever almost had a near accident and like you just like go on
No.
and you're like, oh, that was a close call. And then years later, you're like, oh my God, what was that? That's how I feel about it now. Like it was so hard, but I had no idea it was so hard, and I moved to LA in the 90s. I mean, it was every man for himself. Women did not have a lot of power. You were just playing
Yeah.
dodgeball every day. And thankfully, I developed a really nice, like, dumb Southern blonde routine where people would say things to me and I'd be like, I don't know what you mean. And they'd be like, well, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't know what you mean. And they're like, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
understand you. What do you mean? Because no one was willing to be like so overt. Everyone was always like just trying to get to manipulate you. If you just ask them enough times what they
Oh
mean,
God.
they'd get tired of you and they'd be like, she is really dumb. Shoo her along. And I'd be like, wee. Out the door I'd go.
Great.
Occasionally I'd be like, aren't you married? So it was the 90s in Hollywood was really fun and really tricky.
But what I was really excited by and I find very interesting is the fact that throughout your whole time in Hollywood and your whole time acting, you got to the point in 2019 when you created your own non-for-profit, offering social and emotional language awareness to combat negative personal narratives and support peaceful conflict resolution. And I read that and I thought, wow, I've never heard anything like that. And a lot of the times, just from what I've seen, when actors and filmmakers and people that have been in the public eye, when they start to do other things within charities, it's things that we kind of immediately recognize and know and potentially have seen before. Animals, something for starving children in a third world country or something like that. But your one's just really kind of strikes out of being an important need and something that's potentially not spoken about as much as it should be. Tell us a bit more about your charity and why you exactly decided to create it. Your not-for-profit, sorry.
I had a child. And there were a series of events that happened, but the show ended when she was about a year old, and people who I worked with were interested in me getting another job right away. And one thing I realized is when people say you can do it all, you can't. You absolutely cannot. You're going to be halfway with something or less than halfway.
Mm.
And acting requires many hours on set, and it requires you to be available to them first. And I saw that as a direct conflict with the kind of parent that I wanted to be. But the thing that sort of started me on my journey just in thought, not in any sort of action, but I would see people and I cannot tell you, and I heard this exact sentence repeatedly. When are you going to do something real?
Oh, wow.
And it terrified me because I thought, that is your view of parenting. And by parenting, I mean agreeing to be a child's mentor, agreeing to be the person that says, I've stepped there before and it's sticky. I've stepped there before and that water's deep. Look, I learned to read. This is how I did it. I learned to talk about colors. These are colors. I learned to be kind to nature and to appreciate how things grow. This is how I did it. So that is what I think parenting is. I don't think parenting is paying for school. It's a part of it. I think parenting is time together and sharing your part of life and hearing another person's idea and watching that expand. So when I heard people regularly say, when are you going to do something real? It made me very nervous. And I started thinking about, how do we begin talking about parenting as being the most real thing that we do? And then I had a friend of mine named Tracy Ivanation who was celebrating her birthday in Los Angeles. She's from Canada. And she said, for my birthday, she's an entrepreneur and very successful. And she said, for my birthday, I want to go work this entrepreneurial program in prison called Defy. And I was like, what's your birthday? I'll do what you want. So I joined her. And the way it works is it's people coming up with entrepreneurial business ideas while they're currently incarcerated to help them find work when they parole. What I was struck by when I was in there was how many people had children. And I just started, again, doing the math and creating an algorithm of, what does it look like for all those children to not have these parents? And what does it look like for these parents to go back and try and connect with their children, which can be very hard because, the child sort of always wins. They're needier. If the child's hungry and you're hungry, the child's going to get the food. And I thought, we've created a lot of very hungry people who are going back to a lot of hungry children. And I wanted to just sort of create a talking speaker series about community and communication and how you can listen and solve problems, what it's like when your needs are not being met and how you can calm yourself naturally, how you can re-enter an environment that's gone on without you, how you can have successful relationships, and how to know when you can't have successful relationships and have peaceful relationships instead. Not every relationship is going to be good. Many are unsuccessful. That's the way the world works. But it doesn't mean that those unsuccessful relationships can't be peaceful or not inflammatory or not hostile or not violent. And so I started a program where we talked about that. And then as I was working the program, there's a study called ACEs, which is Adverse Childhood Experiences. And I started seeing how many people I was working with had, and their high number of ACEs. And I thought, we really, really need to be doing a better job about community structure and helping children and helping spot those children who are already suffering before they get to the place where they feel just blanketed by so much adversity that they're not left with opportunity. And when I say opportunity, I don't mean job opportunity. I mean the opportunity of having a full emotional crayon box. By opportunity, I mean having an opportunity to live, having an opportunity for comfort, for care, for connection. I think these things have become underrated, and we have become investing more in a virtual community. And I think part of what made our evolutions as humans so successful was our connection to community, our storytelling, our multi-generational interaction. And so I'm working to try and make that important again. And I think people don't see it as a natural extension of acting, but I do, because If I had been a better student, if I had gone to see my advisor, I would have been, I think, a behavioral scientist. And that's really what I was doing with the acting, was thinking about how people work and thinking about how people engage with one another and how the choices that you make in your life send you down one path or another, and how
Definitely.
paths reconvene. And that's really what I'm doing now, is I'm thinking about how those silly narratives that we tag ourselves with and tag others with influence our lives, and how unnecessary that is. And what happens if we go back and undo it, and really just try and communicate well, and invest in community. What does it look like?
I love what you said there about investing in communities, because communities really do change, and some of the digital technology we have is really good, but on the other hand, it does affect the way we communicate in potentially not the most organic or best ways possible. And I also loved what you said regarding relationships. What creates a peaceful relationship from a bad relationship?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways to answer that. A stable relationship can remain peaceful when people listen to each other, when people are engaged, um, and feel a sense of togetherness. What creates bad relationships, toxic bad relationships, I believe, has a lot to do with unresolved trauma in people's lives. My daughter, when she was very young, we were going to get into this school, and they tested her, and they came back and they said, "Oh my gosh, Pippa is really good at math." And she tested at this very high level of math, and then she gets into third grade and she can't do her math. So I hire a math tutor, and his name's Tom. And I said to Tom, "Can you explain to me why Pippa can't do math now?" Because they had tested her, and she ranked so high at math, and it's well past this point, and but she's fallen off and can't understand math anymore. And he goes, "Oh, it's very simple. Somewhere along the way, Pippa got a hole in her base learning of math. So
Okay.
she can build scaffolding around it, and she can get to all the places she needs to be, but she's never really going to truly understand math because there's a hole in her base learning." So I do think one of the things that causes bad relationships over time is that there's a hole in base emotional learning. And I think this is possible for everyone, everywhere. And it doesn't always have to do with trauma, but I think at some point there's a hole in the base emotional learning, and we create scaffolding and we can get around it. And we can go on and have very successful relationships, but there's always going to be sort of a fatal flaw in our emotional understanding. And I do think that a lot of those can be corrected if we operate within our communities differently. And I love virtual content. I love our storytelling that we get to watch on television. I think it's very important. And I think it leads us in new directions and helps us answer questions. And it brings to light things that we should be looking at. But I think what it doesn't do is it doesn't allow a sense of completeness of circumstance, of emotion. So if you feel sad and you want to feel happy, you can go and watch something happy and you'll feel happy for a minute, but you didn't really work through your sadness. So we need other humans to be complete in that way. I don't know if
I
that answered
completely,
your question.
oh gosh, you completely answered the question. Fascinating, and I agree with what you said. I wonder, do you go into the prisons? Have you been in a prison and spoken to anybody about this, or
Oh
how
yeah.
does? Okay, so you actually go.
Oh yes, of course. Of course.
Okay, and what is the experiences like for you? Because of, I say obviously, and I mean obviously, you haven't been to prison before, and I've filmed in a prison before, and it's kind of really eye-opening and quite shocking
Hmm.
in many ways.
Yeah.
So what was that experience like for you?
Well, I think the first part I have to speak to with that experience is conflict, that
Okay.
internal conflict that people have. and that I had, which is we grow up with this narrative of putting people away. And there's so much conflicted feeling in there, because I have had people that I love have severe crimes committed against them. And I look at the person that did
Sorry
it
to
and
hear
think,
that.
what?
Sorry to hear that.
Oh, thank you. Yes. And I think, how will I ever reconcile my feelings with that person? So there's a lot of conflict, because there are people who are in prison who should be there and who should stay there. So you kind of have to wade through a lot of that. And it seems very scary. So once you kind of get past that, and that was really one of the most eye-opening experiences for me about personal narrative, was I realized how much personal narrative I was dropping in on this experience. What I have found was that there were a great number of people that I worked with who had so little positive connection and so little exposure to emotional language and conflict management language, and having someone say, let me show you how to do this. I'd like to hear your story, and let me show you some ways that you can live in the world with kindness. And I have met some of the most just deeply kind people. And I think it's because they've been fully to the bottom, and they're able to see what that looks like. And they know kindness in a much deeper way. One book that I always recommend to people is my friend Quan Nguyen wrote Sparrow in the Razor Wire. And I thought that was just an excellent look at what it feels like. You know, for me now, it feels like any other place that I work. I have hopes that people thrive, and that people reconnect with their families, and they get an opportunity to be upstanders. I think we all feel better with purpose. And for 90% of us, we all want to be upstanders. There is that 10% that I think it does not apply to, but it's probably even less than that, to be honest. It's probably a 5%, but I think people want to be upstanders. We want to have purpose. We want to see a kind, good world.
I
And
completely agree with you.
and you know, we're witnessing that now in our global circumstance. We're witnessing someone who possibly exists within that 5% being confronted by millions of people who want to upstand and see, you know, just peaceful transaction of life.
And people are part of this program. Is there, without, I understand you can't give any names of people in the program, but can you give us examples of people that have gone on to respond to the kindness and lead a more fulfilled life?
Oh my gosh. I had two brothers in our very first class, and not long after they completed the program, they intervened in a crime in prison. And it was within their own gang, which is something that you really don't do. You don't, if your gang is against another gang, you don't really step in. You just stand in solidarity with your gang. And they stepped in because what they saw was happening was wrong, and they felt like it was wrong. And they prevented something horrible. And when they asked about it, they said, we didn't realize before that we could make our own choices. We thought we always had to be a part of the group. We didn't realize that we could look within ourselves and make our own choice. And that's what we did. We made our own choice. And I've seen so many examples of people. I can't tell you how often it said, like, I didn't know this was an option. I didn't know that I could listen to another person's story, and by my listening, they could feel better. I didn't know that by telling my story to another human, that their listening would make me feel better. We have had so many people who've gone through the program have been downgraded to lesser security prisons and have gone on to start programming there themselves.
Wow.
And this is by, I think, very small amounts of effort. And I look at all of those cases and think, what if we had seen what was going on with this person when they were 5 or when they were 8
Yeah.
or when they were 10? How much suffering could we have saved for everyone, for their victims families, for them, for their families? I mean, so much can be prevented, I think, by finding a different way to be in community starting very early with each other. I'm a very strong believer in, preschool and children being able to be together and parents being able to
Yeah.
be together and having safe spaces within every neighborhood that offer sort of gathering and togetherness. I'm a very, very big fan of that. And really, if in my lifetime we see more mental health support for teachers and students in school, I think if we reintroduce this and we really allow people to start talking about things that they are struggling with, and we address that head on, I think we'll see real change. And it's doesn't cost anything. I mean, that's free.
You're saying a lot of kind things, a lot of the right things. And it's clear that you see the world. You don't just see yourself, and you see people that may not be on the same level of happiness that you are, and you want them to be. That's unbelievably clear. You want them to be as happy as you and as happy can be. Where does this come from within inside you to share knowledge and hope for people to be the best person they can possibly be?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. Let me think about that.
I mean, you've mentioned your mother, you mentioned your grandmother. Do
Oh
they
my
play a
gosh.
part?
I mean, my dad, I think I have a lot of really supportive influences. And then, I mean, you always have to ask yourself the question, is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it both? And I think you have to ask it in every situation. I have to be honest with you. If I could really sit with that question for a long time, the place that I might start might be the fact that I'm adopted. And
Okay.
I think I spent, the first couple of weeks of my life in a large community, and I'm going to guess that it was positive. But I think I probably was with a great number of babies. And I think that on some level, there is a part of me that knows what it's like to enter a group that would not have been mine and be accepted by it, and to be very aware of that not happening for everybody. My guess is that maybe a lot of it is there. And then I also think being an extrovert really helps, because for better or for worse, and I don't know where you fall in that category, but being extroverted, I rarely think about myself. I'm always like out in the world, so I don't think so much about what I'm going to say before I say it. I don't think so much about
Okay.
what I'm going to do before I do it. And I think that allows me, like, I get a really good slice of humanity that way, because I'm always like, who's out there? What are they doing? What are they talking about? What are they thinking? And it can be super embarrassing when I look back on it. But I do think it really allows people, you really get to look at people because you really want to, if that makes sense.
Oh, completely makes sense. And if you don't mind me asking, how old were you when you were adopted?
So I think I was in the children's home for 6 weeks. It was kind of standard fare, whatever that was back in the late 60s. I think I was there for 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. But
And
I
did you
do
ever,
think it provides you a different beginning.
and has there ever been an interest to reconnect to the person who gave birth to you? Or
I think about it all the time, and it is like one of those things on my life to-do list, because I feel like I want to reach out and say, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I have had this super interesting life." And and also it would be very interesting to see if we are similar in our personalities. You
Mm,
know, if the stock that I come from also cares about these kinds of ideas, because then I would have more evidence of nature or nurture. So I do think about it all the time. Um, and then also, you just have that thought of like, oh my gosh, am I opening up a can of worms on their end or my end? Or, what if we're not alike at all?
yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm pretty sure I will do it. But, time is ticking. I should do it if I'm going to do it.
When the time's right, I'm sure you'll do it. That's for sure. So
And I think the best thing that anyone can do, and this is what I talk about in the program, do your best to leave a breadcrumb of happiness every day. And it's a
yeah,
very simple thing to do. If you don't want to engage with another person, just pick up one piece of trash and put it in a trash can nearby. If you live in a big city where tensions are high on the road, if someone lets you over, stick your hand out and wave. You
yeah,
know, if someone honks, give a wave. If you see someone, a homeless person or someone who seems like they don't get much engagement, say hello as you pass. These breadcrumbs of happiness make such a difference. I always tell people, if you think about what it feels like to have someone honk at you in the beginning of the day and how sort of mistreated it can make you feel and how you carry it with you, it's just a stain. The same is
yeah.
true if you say hello to someone. That can carry someone through a whole day. And just little small breadcrumbs of happiness dropped along the way can change our planet. It's easy, it's free.
And you're not wrong. You're not wrong at all, Emily. Thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciated you taking the time to speak to me and tell me about how you got started and the brilliant not-for-profit that you're working on. And I definitely hope to speak to you soon.
And I hope we get to meet in person someday.
If you liked this podcast, share it with friends, leave a comment in the comment section, and hit the subscribe button.